At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Carbyne, it's multimedia. You can get text, translate to whatever language, getting away with the legacy equipment and going into a cloud-based solution.
It's the first time in U.S. history that we have an EZNet through cloud-native call handling.
As a police officer, to have the victim go video, that's unheard of.
You're getting upgrades every month, not every year.
To schedule your free Carbyne demo, please visit carbyne.com/WTT.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned. Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be In the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Carbyne, and I just wanted to jump in here really quick before we get to the episode, because this is actually going to be an Imagine Listening episode, and it's one that I recorded just a week or so ago at the 2022 Indiana 911 Professionals Conference. And it was the first time I was back in about 4 or 5 years. And, the crazy thing is, Imagine Listening started at that conference. So it was awesome to go back where that started and to do it again. And to do it with so many people that were there that have never experienced Imagine Listening before. There were a few that have, a few that I knew, but there were a lot of first-timers to that conference, which was amazing. And, all I can say was that, as I say about all of the Imagine Listening sessions, it was powerful. This one is heavy. I'm not going to lie. This one is pretty heavy. But it's good. You've got all of these folks who were in there sharing these stories, pouring their hearts out. And a few of the stories will be ones that were written and submitted in for that session as well. So while you're listening to the audio with the audience, there'll be a couple spots where I pop in with 3 different stories. There were ones that were written down and submitted in, but man, it took just one person, as always, to immediately say, I want to share out loud, and then so many more were sharing and more, and we were just talking and getting it out, and it was just amazing. So thank you all for being there, for sharing a story, and if you didn't share a story, it's okay, because you were there in support of everyone else, and that's what we were doing in there, supporting each other, healing, and finding some sort of closure through the power of storytelling. So thank you so very much. There's just no way to really explain, to describe what it's like there in the room with everyone, sharing stories, and with people who know exactly where you come from, in a spot where you just feel comfortable, actually comfortable sharing, and it's good. So without further ado, Imagine Listening.
Imagine watching your son take off on his four-wheeler. You've witnessed this many times. He rides, he has fun, and all is well. Now imagine you were 911, taking a call from frantic parents who have just found their son underneath his flipped four-wheeler. You listen to the parent scream while removing it off his body. You tell them that help is on the way, and you give them CPR instructions. An officer arrives, and you listen as he performs CPR. "Come on, buddy. Come on," is what you hear over the phone. This is what it's like within the trenches. In this episode, you'll hear stories from the I Am 911 movement, a movement I started to fight the reclassification of dispatchers from clerical to protective and bring awareness to the types of calls the 911 dispatchers answer on a daily basis. This is an Imagine Listening session, and we are here together in person at the 2022 Indiana 911 Professionals Conference. Now, you heard the warning at the beginning, but I must warn you again and add that if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening at your own risk. The stories you're about to hear are all true and come from the dispatchers who live them. While some stories have a good outcome, the majority are horrifying. This is our reality. Your worst day is our everyday. So let's start with a bang. I want you to imagine each story. Become the dispatcher who has taken each call, and imagine listening. So that story that I started out with, that was my call. And about a week after I started the I Am 911 movement, and I shared that story and asked for others to share similar stories, I was watching Stranger Things. At that time, the first season had come out, and there was an episode where the sheriff is doing CPR on this kid who'd been missing throughout the whole show. And as I'm watching it, I just started bawling. I had no idea why at the time. And I realized that was my trigger. I was watching that call that I took play out in front of me in a TV show. And it sucked. But that's why I share this as well. Because it's therapeutic. Whether you believe it or not, there's healing and closure in storytelling. That's what we're doing. Who has a story they would like to share?
So it was 12 years ago. I had a mother call frantic. They couldn't find their 2-year-old child, which hit hard because my daughter was 2 at the time. He had gotten out of the house. I heard every emotion come from the parents when they located their son face down in a creek behind their property. I heard every compression that the father did on the child, every breath. And still to this day, I can remember it as plain as day. And every breath she took as she ran from the very far back of the house all the way to the front to flag down the officer to take him to where her son was.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So mine was 24 years ago. I took a call from an 18-year-old who told me that she was ready to end her life. And while she's talking, you can hear clinking on the phone. So I asked her what, it was before EPD and all of that. So it was basic questions, and she was married off at the age of 16 and she was upset with her mom. So I asked her what the clinking noise was that I was hearing, and it was the gun in her mouth. She said, "I wish I could just talk to my mom right now." And I said, "I can get your mom out there to talk to you." And she said, "My mom's the reason I'm dead," as she pulled the trigger. And I can still hear the gunshot, and I can still hear her voice to this day.
I forget how long ago, 14, 15, some number of years like that, got a call that was transferred by the police dispatcher over to me as the fire EMS dispatcher from a 17-year-old girl who was having an asthma attack. She had just moved into this apartment and did not know her address. So the police dispatcher, her partner, was calling this girl's work because work had her new address and they were trying to find the address. However, while this is all going on, it's progressively getting worse. She's at the point where she can't even talk now. So they transferred the call over, said, I thought maybe you could help her with her breathing. And I thought, what the heck am I going to do on the phone? Other than, I just kept reassuring her. And I asked, do we at least know what apartment complex? And they could tell me the name of the complex. So, of course, I just went ahead and started a response to the complex, to the leasing office, at least get them there. So once we had the address, they could get in. As I'm physically standing up and pacing back and forth, because every second now to me even feels like an eternity, all of a sudden I hear her breath quickening and then stop. And my heart just stopped because I thought, oh my God, she stopped breathing. So I let the responders know at this point they're in the complex. They're just waiting for us to tell us where she is. And just after she stopped breathing, police dispatcher came on and said, we got the address. So I immediately told my responders, they go in, I hang up and just, I have no idea now what's going on. About 10 minutes later, they start transporting her. And I listened to the med report and she was actually starting to wake up. So she made it.
Awesome. Thank you.
This was about 4 years ago. I was maybe a year and a half into being a dispatcher. And I answered the phone to a 15-year-old daughter screaming. And it was the middle of summer, very hot, like dog days of summer. And she told me that they had left her 2-year-old sister in the car for about 6 hours. From about 11 a.m. to 6 or 7 p.m. And in the background, I could hear the parents switching back and forth. I could physically hear the cracking of the 2-year-old's chest. She did not make it. That's still something that I struggle with. I didn't know it was a trigger for a long time. So even telling it now, I'm a little emotional about it. But yeah.
So this wasn't too long ago, just about a month ago. Lady calls 911 and she says that her husband wanted her to take his gun. And she said that he had relapsed. He didn't want to go back to jail. And that he wasn't going to go back to jail. So as she's running out the front door, he's running out the back door. And I heard the gun go off. The gun goes off. She didn't want to go check on him. I told her that was fine, stay where she's at, be safe, because I didn't know if he's still alive, if he's going to shoot her. So the officer gets there, and I didn't know that this was happening, but the officer was literally fighting the man who shot himself. And we didn't know this was going on. And afterwards, one of my officers says he's still alive and told her they was still alive. And then, of course, I'm feeling like, shit, I didn't let her go back there to check on him. Maybe she, he might have still lived. And, but then he did succumb to his wound and pass. But I still feel like I don't know if I should have said go ahead. I mean, I'm kind of torn. I hadn't said anything to anybody because I just changed shifts and because I was on Jolie's and these guys. But now I'm on with just men. And men don't really talk about it. Don't really think that, to question somebody. So if you do have a little bit of a problem with the call, I suggest you to talk to somebody.
Always talk to somebody. Don't hold that shit in. I'll get you in just a second.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so mine's kind of short. I answered the phone and I said, tell me your address. And he told me his address. I said, repeat your address. And he repeated his address. I said the phone number, repeat your phone number. Did everything. I said, tell me exactly what's happening. And he said, I have a gun in my mouth and I'm going to kill myself. And the phone went dead. And that was all that I knew. And he went out in the backyard and killed himself. So that was it. That was the whole call.
Thank you.
A few years ago, I had a phone call. It's the one that I still hear in my dreams.
Take your time.
A 13-year-old girl called in, and I could hear her siblings screaming and crying, and I could hear she was trying to stay composed and answer the questions. And she did an amazing job answering the address and telling me that her mom had just shot herself in the bathroom as Dad walked in the front door. And all I could feel was pure anger that the father made his 13-year-old daughter take care of her siblings and call 911 as he stood off to the side and did nothing. And I understand that he was going through a process himself, but I felt anger. I still feel anger for the mother that did that with her children in the house, for the father who stood off and made them call. And it's something I'm still processing 11 years later.
Thank you for sharing. I promise you, it does get easier the more that we share a lot of these stories. I, for a long time, buried calls like that. And being at home, I used to tell myself that I left it at work, but that was bullshit. Because what would happen is I would be there at the house, distant, not really talking, irritable. But once I didn't give a shit anymore what people thought, that I would look weak for asking for help, or talking, or sharing, it got easier. It was therapeutic. That's why I've been doing this ever since, as well as this session. Thank you. You're in a spot here with people who know exactly what you're going through. And these types of calls, please.
So I'm a baby dispatcher. I'm actually still in training. I have about a month left before I get released. And I guess it was just the one, we had a husband call in regarding his wife who was 28 weeks pregnant, and she was bleeding really heavily. He said, you know, we got everybody going that way. But before we disconnected, when they were getting there, I just heard him say, please God, don't take my baby girl. And that one stuck with me. I was very fortunate to find out later that the baby, although born premature, is doing really well, and she made it.
That's awesome. Thank you. And as a baby dispatcher, know that you can reach out to the people around you. Don't be afraid of that. Thank you.
So I have two. The first one is I spent over an hour on the phone with a suicidal person who unfortunately disconnected the call and shot himself. It was shortly after my ex-wife killed herself. I struggled with that for a long time. The one thing that I continue to struggle with, I had 4 child drownings in 5 years that I was involved in. As a field responder, one of the first water calls I ever went to was a 12-year-old that drowned. And following that, I had 4 in the last 5 years. The last one almost ended my career. I didn't actually think that I would recover from that. So I will tell you, I can stand here and tell all of you, make sure you talk to people. One of the biggest things that I stress to my staff on a daily basis is mental health and wellness. I'm a really big proponent of that. So if you don't have a program in place, please get one, because it almost ruined me.
Thank you.
Tears in my eyes listening to everyone's stories. I was sitting here cycling through some of the stories in my head, and the one, sorry. I was sitting here cycling through stories in my head, and there's several that I could choose from. The one that makes me feel the strongest, though, is a call that I took all by myself. There were two of us on. My partner was sleeping on her break in the break room, which was allowed for your hour lunch break. And we had the system where we could buzz people back in if we needed. So if crap hit the fan, or something was going on, you needed to alert your partner that they needed to get back into dispatch. You could hit this alarm and it would open all of the doors in the building, and it would buzz this really loud alarm, and it would wake most people up if they were taking a nap or whatever on their lunch break. And I got this call, and it was, I don't remember what time in the morning, but I want to say about 2:30, 3 o'clock, from this guy, and he just sounded so confused. And of course, we didn't have great technology in my Center for Location Technology, and this is pre other programs now that I work for a company that does. But I knew, he explained to me where he was, and he was up at a very remote lake on the very north side of our county, which butted up against nothing. There was nothing populated. You had to go around mountain passes to get anywhere to the north. And I knew as soon as he started telling me where he was, that he was at least 45 minutes, even for a deputy going code 3, to his location. And he said that his friend had rolled into the lake, into his truck, and he was watching the taillights sink. And that spiked a lot of fear in me. I grew up on a little island in Washington State up near Canada, and we had to take a ferry. There were no bridges to the island. You had to take a ferry or a plane to get to the island. And so we went off island in our vehicle all the time. As a small child, my dad would explain to me how to slowly open a door, basically open the latch in the vehicle. If your vehicle was sinking, if we ever went off the ferry, if we ever went into a lake or something and our vehicle was sinking, he said you have to open the door and you have to slowly push it open with your feet and let the water enter the vehicle and suck up as much air as you can. And so ever since I was a little kid, for some reason that was the thing that was one of my biggest fears, was sinking in a vehicle. And I still think about it and I dream about it sometimes. And so he was literally calling in my worst nightmare. And I just kept praying that the other 911 line would ring and that the guy would call in for help so that I could explain to him how to get out of that car. And I don't think we had a fire protocol that even told us how to get out of a sinking vehicle, but I was like, I know how, and I can tell him. And I was buzzing my coworker back because I thought if I get any other 911 calls, or if this guy does call in on another line, there will be no one else to answer the phone. I need her to come back. And she slept through those alarms. And she, and this is nothing against her. I was just, all the feelings that were going through me, I was just praying that he would call. As his friend was describing, watching the taillight sink, and it turns out that he was intoxicated. They were up there camping. They'd had a lot to drink. He was sleeping in his truck because it was cold, and somehow he had accidentally knocked his truck into gear while he was passed out, and rolled into the lake. And they recovered his body next morning after I'd gotten off shift, and I stayed up that morning until my dispatch partner, who we had trained together for years and we're working opposite shifts now, had texted me and told me that the recovery had been made. I just needed that closure. But to this day, I still literally remember every feeling that I went through, and I wish that he would have called, that I could help him out of that car.
Thank you for sharing that.
2 years ago, I spoke to your concerned family. They said you told them goodbye and did so well giving a description of you and your vehicle. Moments after they hung up, my officer came upon a car versus tree accident with ejection, and my heart sank as he described your car down to the decals. Every time your family called afterwards, my heart broke a little more at the hope in their voices. I am 911. A woman called in and said a dump truck wrecked in front of her. She told me it was on its top. The man inside the dump truck was screaming for help. The dump truck was on fire also. Sadly, the gentleman in the dump truck didn't make it, but the dog did. Her screaming for help for the male was terrible. I am 911. 2 years ago, we were in full swing with COVID, and a young man's mother took her son to the ER for some mental help. The hospital dismissed him fairly quickly, and we eventually get a call that he needs help and is stabbing himself. My officers went to offer help, and the 21-year-old man turned on my officers with a knife. My officers shot the young man, and it was a fatal shot. I will never forget the sound of my officer's voice that day. I am 911.
So I just started training about a month or two ago, and we're still in the process of training. She was still answering 911 calls, and I was listening to everything that she was saying. And this lady called. She was having trouble breathing and hard to understand. First thing that she said was, my son is schizophrenic and he needs to go to the hospital. And so we started getting everyone going for a psych eval. Didn't think anything of it. As the call went along, she said, my son stabbed me in my leg. And so she was having, like I said, she was having a hard time talking. She was having a hard time breathing. And then we thought that she said that he stabbed her in the leg, but actually stabbed her in her chest. As the responders were en route, the line went silent. And we could not get to her or anything. The son still had the weapon. We didn't know where he was. So we started police right away, changed it to a stabbing. She didn't make it on the way to the hospital, and the son, he was arrested and he's still in jail.
Thank you for sharing. I don't know what it is, but we do blame ourselves, right? Sometimes with some of these calls, some of these harder calls. When I had about a week left dispatching, it seemed like the dispatch gods were giving me every shit call that you could think of. It was like I was in a gang and I was getting beat out by all of these calls that were coming in. And sometimes you think about the line of questioning. What if you would have changed your questions? What if? And it starts to eat at you. And that last week, I took a call from a girl on a disorderly complaint. She said a friend of the family had come in and was just going nuts, was throwing stuff around. And at the very end of the call, after I got all this information, at the very end, she goes, I think he's suicidal as well. And I thought, well, it would have been better if you would have told me that the first time, right in the beginning. I had all this information, vehicle description, hang up with her, and I immediately start calling the phone number. We were busy as hell. And I had yelled over to the person on the radio, telling them what they had just told me. And they put it out. Said to start heading there now because of that person who might be suicidal. And the phone is ringing. And I'm just hoping that this guy is going to pick up his phone. Another phone call comes in. Nobody can answer this call. So I hang up, pick up the phone, and I hear a gentleman tell me he just watched a car go into a tree. I asked him if he could see, if he was safe enough to see if the person was okay. And he said, sir, there's no way this person lived, but I will go look. I asked him for the vehicle description. And as he said it, I lifted. And it was a blue Toyota Tercel. And it was him. And after that call, I was blaming myself. What if I would have changed my line of questioning? What if I would have found this out sooner? What if I would have called him sooner? Would it have been a different outcome? It got to the point where I had enough time to take 30 minutes to start mapping out how far it was from that address to where he hit the tree. because I needed to know if I had done everything I could have. I don't see a lot of those Tercels anymore, but when I would think about that person. I finally got to that point where I realized I had done everything that I could. But man, for those 30 minutes that I was sitting there, luckily I was a supervisor, so I could say, you all do what you're doing. I need to figure this out. But I didn't tell anybody what I was doing or why. But I was able to get through it. Thank you all for the job that you do, for sharing these stories. Thank you. What we're doing here is healing through the power of storytelling and finding some form of closure together in sharing. So thank you. And a round of applause for everyone who shared, please.
I want to thank you all very much once again, as I said in the beginning, for being there at the conference, but also for being in the session for Imagine Listening and sharing those stories. I know it can get heavy in there sometimes, but we're all there together. And there was a lot of tears that were shed. There were a lot of people hugging and just comforting each other. And again, it's just powerful, amazing, epic, like everything that you can think of that's good. And it's good to be able to get this out and finally feel comfortable to share, when for a long time it seemed like we were not allowed to feel. And it's a new day, and we've definitely got the feelings coming out now and sharing the stories. So again, thank you all so very much. And a big shout out as well to the Indiana 911 Professionals Conference for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to do not only the opening keynote on the first official day there of the conference, but also to be able to do Imagine Listening and take the time that I needed to allow everyone to be able to share their stories, whether it was out loud or those that were written down and submitted in, but also to be in the industry partner hall and have people come in and be able to talk to them, meet them, and share stories as well and record some episodes. So thank you very much for that. Once again, this has been sponsored by InDigital as well as Carbine. A big shout out to patrons as always. And if you have any comments, questions, or you ever want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/withinthetrenchespodcast. And for any bonus content, if you want to become a patron and help support us, you can check us out. That is patreon.com/WTT podcast. And I thank you all so very much for that. This can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. And then you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.